Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chant, coming to you from the National Weather Service. And we're winding down the Christmas holiday weekend, and we continue to have wintry impacts as a result of a push of warmer, moist air coming in off the Bering that has spread now all the way up through the central and even into the east central interior. And if you'd like additional weather information on what I provide tonight, you can always go to weather.gov, and you can click on this map and it will bring up forecasts as well as watches, warnings, and advisories, and there's much more information to take a look at, radar and forecast maps, air quality alerts, all sorts of things. So if you have a little time to check that out, you can get online, please do that. But let's take a look at what we have in the headlines. Snow and freezing rain is going to continue overnight into early Monday, especially across the east central into south central interior. We continue to see various winter storm warnings and advisories in effect. And then there's also going to be a shot of snow tonight into early Monday morning across the Panhandle that could put down a quick few inches of snow. And I'll show you that advisory in a moment. But otherwise, the pattern is going to remain active here right up until the new year. We got a couple of more systems ahead, and it looks like, though, some rather chilly temperatures could settle in with temperatures averaging below normal across the southern portions of the state into the Panhandle shortly after the new year. And looking at some webcams across the area, Esther Dome there up in the Fairbanks area had some freezing rain this afternoon around 2 o'clock with a temperature of 30 degrees, and looking at the weight of the freezing rain causing those trees to kind of bend downward. Talking with the Fairbanks Weather Service office, they picked up at least 10 inches of snow, and then on top of that, a quarter to nearly a half inch of freezing rain, so quite a mess there. Heavier snowfall amounts over a foot did occur further northeast of Fairbanks, where the precipitation stayed snow longer. And then if we go to the southwest, Chicknick Bay, partly sunny in the 40s this afternoon. A number of temperatures across the southwest portion of the state were in the 40s, and even some 50s, 56 degrees was the high temperature yesterday in Dutch Harbor. And again, readings up there along the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula were in the 40s and lower 50s. Here are the current winter storm warnings, the ones that were in effect along the west coast, including Nome, Kotzebue, Stebbins. Those have since been allowed to expire at 6 p.m. right at showtime. However, they will continue. Winter storm warnings from Ambler and Galena up through Bettles and Tanana through 6 a.m. and then Fairbanks area eastward to the Alcan border until 9 a.m. And then we also still have a winter storm warning and a blizzard warning in effect along the Arctic coast from Prudhoe Bay eastward to Kaktovik. So those areas there, that will be in effect until midnight Monday night. But further south, let's take a look at what we got going on. We have winter weather advisories for freezing rain and freezing drizzle. That includes the Susitna valleys and the Glen Highway through the especially upper Copper River Basin and down through the Anchorage Bowl, and especially say around Whittier, Seward areas. We're expecting things to improve as we go through this evening, so that by midnight that advisory is going to be allowed to expire. But then you can see off to the right side of your screen the set of advisories there for the central and southern Panhandle. A quick shot of snow moving in tonight through about 9 a.m. Monday morning, a quick 3 to maybe as much as 5 inches around Juneau, Sitka, down through Cake, as well as Craig, Metlakatla, and Ketchikan. And that system will be rather short-lived. A more significant snowfall could impact the Panhandle here around New Year's Eve, so stay tuned for future forecasts. But here on the satellite imagery, you can see the enhanced clouds pushing their way eastward up through the Gulf and into the east side of the state and into the Yukon. There's a steady stream of moisture feeding this system. You can see it trailing back from Fairbanks all the way down through Dillingham and then out into the Bristol Bay and the eastern portion of the Bering. And again, this is what has supplied the moisture and brought in well, initially was snow when it came in over the colder air, but then many areas saw precipitation mixed with and then changed to either some light freezing rain or freezing drizzle. A few areas, though, did pick up more than just some light freezing rain. And here is the weather map. Warm front continues to work its way along the Alaska range toward the Alcan border, and that is what has caused the precipitation, the snow, to change to freezing rain, especially now from around Fairbanks down through say Nenana, as well as into the Susitna Valley, and that's going to be spreading eastward into the Copper River Basin here early tonight. And as we go through the overnight, early on Monday morning, that front is going to just kind of stall out across the Alaska range from the Alcan border westward to the Yukon Delta, and it's just going to kind of hang up there for during the day on Monday. And then by Tuesday, the next system will be coming in out of the Bering Sea and pushing more snow and mixed precipitation first from the southwest and west side of the state and spreading it once again inland, especially as we go into later Tuesday and Wednesday. So there will be more advisories and warnings. Taking a look at low temperatures, generally in the teens across the Panhandle and the inner channels. Back out to the west, temperatures are coming up, especially from Anchorage west and southwestward, where readings will be above freezing. Monday afternoon, we're going to get temperature up to 38 there in Anchorage, some 40s, 44 at Homer, 47 at Kodiak, and then lows Tuesday morning in many spots there will not get below freezing, but you could see colder temperatures in the single digits there in through the Panhandle. And then by Tuesday afternoon, temperatures in the Panhandle are going to stay colder, upper teens to 20s, whereas we get out further toward the Alaska range and the Kenai Peninsula, temperatures are going to stay above freezing. Colder air is coming in across the northwest. We got some lows tonight down around 10 below or so there along the northwest Arctic coast. Readings, this is the last of the milder air creeping up along the Yukon River. Still get some temperatures near freezing Monday afternoon south of the Yukon River and just north there of the Alaska range. But then notice the colder lows there, 20 below plus there for the Arctic coast Tuesday morning, and daytime highs remain well below zero then along the north slope and Arctic coast, though we still could see some readings as you get toward McGrath, Galena, southwestward, near and above freezing. Here are the high or low temperatures near and above freezing overnight for say the Kuskokwim, lower Kuskokwim River Basin and running down along the Alaska Peninsula. Monday afternoon highs could be in the 40s as far north as Homer and maybe even upwards to Seward, with 40s and a few lower 50s there along the Alaska Peninsula. And then Tuesday morning lows still near the freezing mark across the southwest interior along and west of the Alaska range. At highs Tuesday afternoon once again could be in the 30s to near 40 across the southwest interior, including Bethel and Aniak, and definitely in the 40s as you get down along the Alaska Peninsula into the Aleutians. So here's the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook for the early new year, January 1st through the 5th. We are anticipating temperatures to average below normal south central areas, the northern Gulf Coast, and into the Panhandle, especially the northern Panhandle. Don't look for any significant long-term warm temperatures. That's just not going to happen. We get these weather systems come in that bump up the temperatures for a couple of days and then they come back down. But it is looking like colder high is going to develop over the Yukon and could definitely cool down the southeastern portions of the state. In turn, we would expect then precipitation to average below normal across maybe much of the mainland as we head into the early new year. But before that happens, we're going to have a couple more storm systems roll across the state here to close out the year.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's time again now for your aviation weather. And if you are planning a flight early this week, Monday into Tuesday, the main weather features will be a front that stalled along the Alaska range from the Alcan border, extending westward through the lower Yukon Delta and then out into the northern portion of the Bering Sea. There's going to be another low lift out of the southwestern or areas north of the western Aleutian Islands, and that's going to be heading up toward Nunavik Island and the Russian coast, Bering Strait area as we go through Tuesday afternoon. But in the meantime, we continue to see IFR conditions lingering Monday morning across the Panhandle. Moisture, though associated with some snow, will be sliding southeastward there. And then areas along and north of the Alaska range, as well as across much of the southwest interior. Interior and the Alaska Peninsula eastern Aleutians. Monday afternoon, look for those areas to hold there along the Alaska Range, extending in through much of the southwest interior, Norton Sound, and down along the Alaska Peninsula. Tuesday morning, there's going to be another frontal system approaching from off the eastern bearing into the southwest, and we expect there to be an expansion of IFR conditions by Tuesday afternoon, extending up there along the spine of the Brooks Range into the North Slope, down through much of the Yukon Valley, the interior southwest, as well as into the Alaska Peninsula. Pass conditions on Monday, Anaktuvuk Pass will see MVFR conditions become VFR, and that'll also be the case at Atigun, conditions improving there to VFR as we go through midday and in the afternoon hours. Further south and west, though, it's going to be a split at Lake Clark and Merrill there along the western arm of the Alaska Range. IFR, especially on the west side, east entrances, MVFR into Cook Inlet. And then for Rainy Pass, a similar situation with IFR conditions there, the western half, the pass into the west entrance, but MVFR on the east side, the east entrance. Windy Pass, as well as Isabel Pass, will generally see IFR conditions hold during the day on Monday. Mentasta will see IFR conditions become MVFR as we get to midday and afternoon. And Tanita Pass should generally hold on to IFR conditions, whereas a little further south there, Portage Pass will be stuck in IFR conditions, the western half into the west entrance, but the east side, east entrance into Prince William Sound will see MVFR conditions. And finally, in the northern panhandle, Chilkoot and White will see IFR conditions give way to VFR conditions as some drier air works its way in from the north. And then as we look at the freezing levels have crept up to 2,000 feet just along and north of the Alaska Range and rise up to around 8,000 feet along the northwestern Gulf Coast in through the southwest, and then along the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island as high as 10,000 feet there up into the northwestern Gulf just off the Kenai. Greatest potential for icing will be out over the northern Bering from around Nunavik Island and the lower Yukon Delta up through St. Lawrence and along the Kamchatka coast. So that icing there, some moderate icing between 3,000 and 15,000 feet with a push of precipitation with that approaching low and frontal system lifting back to the north. Otherwise, 1,000 to 15,000 feet along and south of the Alaska Range and between 5,000 and 15,000 feet there in through especially the lower panhandle. Upper level jet stream winds at 30,000 feet are strongest there, vicinity of Haida Gwaii off of the panhandle, 135 knots out of the north-northwest. And then for areas on the other side of the ridge, a broad ridge out over the North Pacific and lower Gulf, we see winds of 125 to 130 knots there, moving up into north of the eastern Aleutians into the southwest coast. And then finally bringing things down to the 9,000 foot level. Strongest winds remain out over the North Pacific, south of the Gulf, and then also coming on shore there in through the southwestern coast, including Nunavik Island, and then also back out toward the central Aleutians. And at 3,000 feet, strongest winds are there along the lower Yukon Delta and Nunavik Island west to St. Matthew, and then down across the central Aleutians. So we do expect the greatest threat for some isolated severe turbulence to extend from in the morning Yukon Flats. That'll be peeling eastward 2,000 to 8,000 feet, and then the next area of significant turbulence, isolated severe turbulence around St. Matthew Island, just west of Nunavik Island, down through St. Paul, St. George, and then across the central Aleutians, especially in the vicinity of Adak. So that does it for your flight weather. If you do get out, have a safe flight.
Technology. It's the rhythm of our everyday life. We're more dependent on satellite and communication systems than at any other time in history. Disruptions can affect our economy and even our safety. To prepare for the effects of such events and minimize impacts, we need to look outside our atmosphere, some 93 million miles away, at a star we call the Sun. It's our main energy source. It warms the earth and grows our food. While the sun and the space between may seem pleasant from our perspective, it's anything but peaceful. At its surface exists a chaotic state of eruptions and radiation. And unlike Vegas, what happens at the sun doesn't stay at the sun.
Space weather is essentially emissions from the sun, radiation, magnetic field that erupts from the solar surface, pumped out into space, sometimes right towards Earth. When it impacts the Earth, it impacts our technology. That's what we call space weather.
These solar events and their effects at Earth can disrupt systems we take for granted. From causing blackouts to the power grid, to delaying offshore drilling operations due to inaccurate GPS data. Interference with communication systems can force air traffic to reroute and impact rescue response and coordination. Outside our atmosphere, solar radiation can harm astronauts and the systems they depend on. The good news is that these eruptions can be detected early. Forecasters at the NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center in Boulder, Colorado, have their eyes on the sun at all times.
The Space Weather Prediction Center is part of the National Weather Service and is very much like a normal weather forecast office. We're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're looking at data, we're looking at imagery, we're looking at model outputs. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches of imminent activity to our customers so they can take action.
In many ways, forecasting space weather is a lot like forecasting hurricanes. Those who rely on space weather forecasts, like electric power grid managers, are informed early on and can begin taking protective action.
When we see an eruption on the sun, space weather forecasters will issue a watch. And this is much like a hurricane watch. When a hurricane sits offshore of Miami, for example, perhaps 48 hours out, we too can see way in advance that something may be coming towards the Earth.
As the storm moves toward us, it hits a monitoring spacecraft orbiting 1 million miles away from Earth.
It's kind of our buoy sitting out there offshore, and that hurricane about 30, 45 minutes before it makes landfall, we'll get the measurements from the buoy. That's what this spacecraft does for us. That big eruption that left the sun hits the spacecraft. Now we've got the measurements of exactly what's going to impact us here on Earth, and we issue the warnings to give the power grid a heads up that the storm is now imminent. An interesting element to this whole process is that when the forecasters issue the alert, the power grid receives the alert, takes the necessary actions to protect the grid, and the average citizen never knows anything ever happened.
The number of customers who rely on space weather information continues to grow. As our reliance on technology increases, so will our need for constant monitoring of the sun.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
GPS has changed society. Most people don't realize how remarkable and how many different applications there are.
The GPS has become an integral part, not just of our daily lives as far as cell phones and guidance for our cars and mapping, but the whole system in agriculture is really relying heavily on high accuracy GPS.
So they're using GPS to plant those seeds with centimeter accuracy. And then they can come behind it and irrigate and fertilize right where that seed is with that 1 centimeter accuracy.
The GPS creates a line for the operator that he can steer along, or you go to another level and the operator doesn't steer anymore and the tractor has an automatic steering system on it, much like a cruise control on a car, except for when I push the button it doesn't drive a set speed. When I push a button it stays on a predefined line.
You don't even need lights. You can do it at nighttime. You program your GPS and it's driving that tractor for you. So it's huge, and it's changing the way that the farmers farm the fields.
6 or 7 days out.
There's an interest in GPS applications from space weather side because when the sun is eruptive, it causes GPS to falter, and in some cases it doesn't work at all.
Productivity may suffer to a certain degree in that there's no way that I as a human being can steer as good 8 hours a day as a GPS system's going to do. It's going to be the same all day long. Some of the other application technologies, those are going to be gone. We're not going to have the ability to do good section control on sprayers and planters and fertilizer applicators without GPS.
We see a huge growing customer base in so many different industries, so many different sectors now relying on GPS and high precision GPS. They're all big customers for us.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and checking our sea ice edge today, we continue to see mild temperatures across the southwest coast above freezing. We're going to have another frontal system work its way in, pushing inland across the southwest coast on Tuesday. So behind that, winds are going to increase from the southwest again, upwards of 30 to 40 knots, even as high as 50 knots in the vicinity of St. Matthew Island. So the ice is going to continue to shift around. Don't look for much in the way of any further ice development, at least across the coast there, Cook Inlet, including Bristol Bay. But further north, once you get around the Seward Peninsula and northward up into the Chukchi Sea and Arctic coast, the ice there will continue to build as temperatures will remain below freezing. In fact, a reinforcing shot of some colder air coming into the northwest and Arctic coast beginning tomorrow. But looking at the southeast panhandle for the inner canals, winds will be out of the north-northwest. 15 knots, Petersburg down through Ketchikan with waves a few feet, upwards to 20 knots there in Lynn Canal with 4-footers. Otherwise, look for offshore easterly flow there along the Gulf Coast with waves of 9 to 10 feet with some gusts as high as 35 knots around Craig. And then by Tuesday, winds across the inner channels will go northwesterly. Generally 10 to 20 knots, but as high as 30 knots through Lynn Canal with waves there as much as 4 or 5 feet. And then elsewhere along the Gulf Coast, winds are going to be out of the north at 10 to 15 knots and waves generally in the 8 to 10 foot range. For south central areas, winds will be westerly east of the Kenai and Kodiak Island, as well as coming out of the mouth of Cook Inlet at 35 knots. The inner areas where ice is built up on the north end of Cook Inlet, variable winds 10 knots and westerly winds 20 knots with 3-foot waves where there is open water there in Prince William Sound. By Tuesday, we are looking for winds to start to become more west to southwest, lower Cook Inlet and then off the Kenai and northeast of Kodiak. They're picking up to 30 knots with waves out over the northwestern Gulf as high as 10, 11 feet. And then across the Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula on Monday, winds will generally be out of the southwest around 30 knots, waves around 9 feet in Shelikof Strait, upwards to 13 feet as you get offshore there on the North Pacific and Gulf side. 6 to 8 feet though, Bristol Bay, where you're free of ice, down toward Cold Bay. And then On Tuesday, winds will generally be out of the southwest around 25 to 30 knots. Waves 10 to 13 feet on the North Pacific and Gulf side, 6 to 8 feet on the Bering side. Across the Aleutian chain on Monday, winds will generally be from the south at 30 to 40 knots. Waves running about 15 to 18 feet on the North Pacific side and 10 to 13 feet on the Bering side. And then for Tuesday, winds will be southwesterly across the eastern Aleutians at 25 to 30 knots with waves 9 to 13 feet on the Bering side and 17 feet or so on the North Pacific side, and winds will turn a little more southwesterly, picking up to 30 knots there as you get way out west of Adak toward Shemya. Otherwise, for the west coast and southwest coast on Monday, we are expecting winds to be south-southwest around 30 to 35 knots. So the ice will continue to shift around with temperatures staying above freezing there, Bristol Bay on up along through Nunavik Island. Easterly flow, though, once you get Norton Sound, east winds 25 knots. So again, ice could shift around. And then Tuesday, as that frontal system works its way inland across the southwest coast, winds will pick up anywhere from around 30 to 40 knots from the southwest, with winds as high as 50 knots in the vicinity of St. Matthew Island. And then along the Arctic coast, strongest winds will be 45 knots out of the west there at Kaktovik, but further west they fall off to 20 knots at Utqiagvik. And then going down through the lower Chukchi Sea, winds kind of variable, but more northerly as you come through the strait, and then turning easterly out of Nome and Port Clarence, north of St. Lawrence Island. And then looking at winds on Tuesday, generally 15 to 20 knots from the west along the Arctic coast, turning northeasterly from Utqiagvik down through the lower Chukchi Sea, but increasing to 45 knots there off of Cape Lisburne and Point Hope, and upwards to 40 knots from the southwest on the north side there of St. Lawrence Island. And so the front will stall out across the Alaska Range and the southwest coast overnight into Monday, and then another system moving onshore with another front on Tuesday. Thank you for watching, and I hope you had a great Christmas.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.